How's it going, everybody? It's Riley's Redzone here, back with another Redzone's roster previews episode. In today's video, I'm going to be taking a look at the Indianapolis Colts. So in every single one of these videos, I take a look at the team, I predict whether every single player will make the roster and make an impact on the team, be a practice squad member, or be cut from the team. I then also take a look at the schedule, and I predict how many games that team can win, and I also give out awards to top players who fit that category. So you can see all the previous episodes in the top corner here. And with that being said, I'm going to jump right into talking about the Indianapolis Colts. Starting, though, with the coaching staff before I get to the players. Frank Reich, to me, is a solid head coach. I believe in him fully. One of the best coaches I think we've covered so far in this series. And I think he, no matter what, now that they even have a potential future quarterback, will always be able to take his team to the playoffs, at least to me, with Frank Reich at the helm. He's a great offensive play caller. I'll talk about, obviously, Carson Wentz in a little bit because he's their quarterback. But I do think he can fix what was potentially broken and be really good and help Wentz's fundamentals and everything that needs some work still. And that's when Wentz had a successful season with Frank Reich. So I think he's going to make some great play calls, make some great just overall scheme fits in this offense, and really get guys going that maybe wouldn't succeed in other systems. I mean, we saw last year Jonathan Taylor already starts to look like a beast. I mean, at one point Marlon Mack was pretty good. Nyheim Hines, T.Y. Hilton still being involved. Like, he makes players still very, very involved in different ways. And even you look at other weapons we'll talk about later, he's able to turn guys into what they can potentially be. So I feel absolutely confident in Frank Reich, and I believe he's one of the best coaches in the NFL. So now let's start talking about the players, starting with the quarterback position. Now, I'm going to say straight up, the reason the Colts are perhaps lower than what other people may have them at is strictly because of the injuries. But honestly, I think the injuries are getting better. I shifted them down from where they originally were in the rankings because of the injuries. And it got to a point where I got to where it was basically the latest I could change the rankings. Because if I changed them drastically after that, it would truly affect past videos and future videos with the records and everything. So I moved them, maybe closer to a month ago, or whenever closer to a month ago than it was now, whenever the Wentz news kind of came out, and then the Quentin Nelson news as well. So the injuries are a huge reason to rank lower. So I honestly myself still feel that they're lower compared to where I would like to place them, but I just feel that is a concern. Potentially their two best, at least most impactful players on their offense being their quarterback and their best lineman, potentially out for a bit. It seems, though, like they are progressing, at least Wentz is. So let's transition to the quarterbacks here. Wentz was initially given an injury timeline of about 5 to 12 weeks, and it was okay. I mean, that doesn't really help us. But it seems he's getting closer. Now, he for sure won't probably get any time in the preseason. They've been giving those snaps to Eason and Ellinger. I think it was a very good move bringing him in. I think it's a good move for him. He needed a fresh start. His fundamentals even were kind of shaky. But just his overall confidence and everything just seemed down last year. Like, it was really unexpected. Just too many turnovers that you didn't necessarily see coming. And I was shocked by the regression that took place. I thought that potentially he was going to take a step up last year with the Eagles, but that was clearly not the case. They ended up, benching him and everything. He looked like a broken man out there last year, and I do think he will be improved this year with a better offensive line, at least if Quentin Nelson's healthy. And at least because the Eagles dealt with some injuries on the offensive line too, which made them not always the greatest, but they're a pretty solid offensive line as well. But having Quentin Nelson alone is huge. I think so. Having great protection, having good receivers, better than what he's had in Philly, and just overall, I think he needs that confidence back. And I think he's starting to get that maybe in even a better spot geographically to where he's used to can help him out. Familiar with his coach now. That's a great fit for him as well. So I believe that this was a perfect fit for Wentz. And I think he does take a huge step up this year. If he is dealing with an injury, as soon as possible, he will make a difference on this team. I mean, I don't know if he's probably around a similar level what Phillip Rivers was last year for this team. I would actually place his ceiling for sure above, but I would say he's better right now. And, they made it to the playoffs with older Phillip Rivers 1 year pre-retirement. So I think that Carson Wentz will succeed in this offense, and I truly think that was a good move to go get him. And even if he is a little banged up this year, I'd rather keep him healthy and keep whatever is left with his confidence in him, and maybe he can fix the fundamentals this year of his throws. So behind him, it was interesting. They brought in Brett Hundley, for example, and that's when I thought, maybe are they, having to deal with this injury and they're concerned, but I think more so they just needed another body out there because they've been giving Jacob Eason and Sam Ehlinger reps in the preseason games, and they're still debating. I don't know if one might potentially have to start a few weeks. So there's some debate on no matter who wins the backup job, but then, who could potentially play. So Eason's been getting reps with the ones in the preseason, at least, with the ones that are out there and the twos. He's been given, the first half most of the time. And I think he's performed relatively well. He fell in the draft to where I thought he was going to go coming out of Washington last year. Ended up getting him in like the 4th round. I thought he was going to go maybe in the 2nd or 3rd. I think his upside is very high. He has a very strong arm. He has a rocket out there. I think that can be a good thing, which is his arm is closer to Carson Wentz. I think that he has a really good arm talent. Potentially, though, he's kind of closer then to a Wentz or maybe James Winston, where he's going to maybe try to throw deep a little bit more often. So if you're looking for explosiveness in the passing game, I think he would be a solid choice. Sam Ehlinger, I was shocked the Colts of all teams took him in the 6th round, but I thought that was about where he should go. He was pretty solid at Texas. I actually gave him a comp of Tim Tebow, which is interesting because if you watched him, he's actually looked pretty quick in the preseason. His mobility is something, he might be the most mobile out of those 3 I have up top. Hundley's pretty mobile as well, but I feel like he's just kind of a temporary arm. But I feel like Sam Ehlinger has a chance here to compete with Jacob Eason. He's performed well as well. His arm is nothing special, and that's why I originally had him maybe saying he could be better at tight end, but he's actually performed pretty well so far. But I liked him coming into this year's draft. I had him around, I believe it was about QB 11, so lower than what he was potentially drafted at, because I think after that first tier of quarterbacks, it really was only like Ian Book and Sam Ehlinger that really were picked. So I think that he is given an opportunity to perform well here, and the mobility is what is good for him. And so literally from this preseason, and because of the injury, he has gone from a practice squad to a roster level player for me, and I'm starting to feel pretty good in Sam Ehlinger as a developmental player on this team. Between him and Eason, you're looking solid at the backup. If one has to start for a game or 2 or more, I think you might be okay. As I mentioned, they bring Brett Hundley. I like Brett Hundley. I was shocked when the Cardinals started to go with like Chris Strevler last year at backup, because I still like the upside of Hundley. He's very mobile, but I believe he's just going to be a camp arm in this situation. So I love the QB room here. Carson Wentz, I think, will really bounce back and develop to closer what he was a few years ago than what he was last year. And then I like the upside of Eason and Ehlinger both. So you're going to be fine at the quarterback position, even if Wentz were to potentially miss a few games. The running back room is also so depth-filled. It's unbelievable. Jonathan Taylor, I think, is very interesting because last year, I think his season was underappreciated. But now I think for example, in fantasy, he's starting to become a little overrated. But he's somewhere in the middle for me where he's an absolute stud. Super confident in him. It is interesting, the Colts did just choose to bring Marlon Mack back, but for how cheap it was, it kind of made sense. So I think that Jonathan Taylor is such a great player overall, and he's a sure thing. He's solid carrying the football, very explosive, lots of power. I think that he is a true difference maker. I just think for fantasy purposes, I also mentioned that Frank Reich can make the most of other players. And that's what I think he kind of does with Marlon Mack and Nyheim Hines this year. where I think Jonathan Taylor is an all-around back, a 3-down back. I feel confident in that. But when you have other guys that need to get in the rotation because they're pretty good, Frank Reich is going to find ways to put guys on the field. So Marlon Mack, coming back from, I think it was an Achilles injury last year. He missed pretty much the whole season. He is, not going to be the starter anymore. But I think he can still be an impact with his speed. Maybe get some stretch plays to the outside. Perhaps could be a receiving option. But to me, that more so is going to be the Nyheim Hines role, who when given opportunities is absolutely explosive, super, super fast. I feel like he's going to potentially be the third down back. Jonathan Taylor can be your first 2 downs and some third downs, and Marlon Mack can be the change of pace back when Taylor's tired. So that's where I think they go with that. I also have them keeping Jordan Wilkins. I just feel like he's performed well over the past few years and also doing pretty well this preseason. He's kind of somewhere in between where he's not particularly unbelievable at anything, but he's kind of okay at everything. They also have Benny LeMay, who had a solid preseason game last week. He has, he had the infamous taunting call like the first time in the league where they're really enforcing that. So his power is pretty solid, and to me that game proved to me he can be a practice squad player. I have him cutting Deion Jackson, an undrafted rookie out of Duke this year, with some speed. But I absolutely love the running back room. It's so depth-filled. It just is where are they going to give guys touches? That's why I think personally Jonathan Taylor is perhaps overrated in fantasy right now. Not because of how good he is. He's absolutely a stud. There's other mouths to feed in this offense, and I don't know how they're going to involve everybody, but I absolutely love the talent. 3 solid guys that at least should be a top 2 on almost every team, but potentially could be starters, almost any of them. The receivers, I like where they're trying to go with the receivers. They're going younger, but they just don't have a whole ton of top depth, in my opinion, behind T.Y. Hilton and maybe Michael Pittman. And I just don't know. I have them keeping like 4 practice squad guys because they've all performed well in the preseason where I don't want to let them go. But none of them have like so stood out that they deserve a roster spot. So T.Y. Hilton is what he is at this point. They decided to bring him back this year. He's not what he used to. I don't even think he's a number 1 receiver in my opinion at this point in his career. I'd rather have him be a number 2. But maybe he can be kind of a close out his career here in Indianapolis and mentor these younger players that potentially could be involved. So I just think he's not what he used to be, but he still can be a developmental coach almost at this point in his career. I mean, that's really what he still is okay. Like, he should be out on the field. He's better than what Larry Fitzgerald is at this point in his career, but he's definitely closer to Larry Fitzgerald than what he was a few years ago. And then you have Michael Pittman, who I think takes a huge step up this year, given more opportunities. I think that will be big for him. I think they're going to get him involved in the receiving game and maybe the screen game, end around game, something like that. Jet sweeps. I think they'll try to give him the ball in open spaces where I think they're going to try to go with him. I do think he will be a top target for Carson Wentz. Obviously, he still has this number that Carson Wentz originally had, but I think that Michael Pittman takes a huge step up this year, and I'm feeling really good about him. Zach Pascal has performed well for this team when given opportunities. I like him as a 3rd, 4th role. I do think that he also offers some potential stability there when you need something for Wentz. Paris Campbell is an interesting player to talk about because we've been waiting on him a bit. He just has not been given the opportunities, and I think finally with Frank Reich this year, he's going to find a way to potentially get him the ball in open space. I think that's where they're going to go with him, kind of just a more good in open space version of Michael Pittman, but less of the actual receiving game. I think they're almost going to treat him like a Cordell Patterson, almost like closer to a running back where they're just going to run screens for him and stuff. That's where I see Paris Campbell at. I think they want the ball in his hands. And then you have a competition for this 5th, and maybe if you want to keep a 6 receiver, I sometimes keep 6. I like to, but I just would rather, I don't know where they're going to go here. I for sure think that out of this next tier, with guys like Mike Strachan, Desmond Patman, Tariq Black, and Tyler Vaughns, I feel like they're all performing well in the preseason and camp. But I'm going to give it to Strachan, who I believe they just took this year, but he has looked pretty solid. I would say, the best out of this group. So I'm going to give that spot to him if he can prove anything on special teams. But I also have loved the way Desmond Patman performed as well so far. So I think he is not someone just to throw out of the mix. Potentially could be the sixth receiver. I'm not a huge Ashton Doolin guy, but they have him relatively high in the depth chart, so I'm keeping him around. But he would be one of the guys I would potentially cut off the practice squad if needed. I just feel like Tariq Black and Tyler Vaughns, both young players, have performed really, really well so far this offseason. So I would actually love to see them potentially fight for a role better than Ashton Doolin. So I think you have all those guys, and then you also have DeMichael Harris, who I think ends up being cut. But I just don't know how to feel about this receiver room. It's honestly not great. But if you can get some impact from Michael Pittman, I for sure see. But then if you can, the X factor to me, perhaps in this entire offense, is can you get Paris Campbell going? If you can get him going in the right direction, I think he could truly be a difference maker for this offense. Then the tight end room, solid top three. I mean, Jack Doyle is the definition of a security blanket. He is going to be very, very solid overall. But he doesn't have the highest upside. He's just kind of a good route runner, a potentially good blocker, just kind of on the slower side, but just kind of is there. Close to like what he had with Zach Ertz for Wentz in Philadelphia. But Mo Alley Cox has slowly been creeping up closer to Jack Doyle, where Alley Cox has higher upside for sure. He's huge size-wise. I mean, he is closer almost to a basketball player. He can go up and get it, and I think he definitely has maybe dealt with some drops before, but the upside of him is unbelievable. So I love him there as a backup and potentially competing for a role. They also have Kyle Granson, who they took this year out of SMU. He's performed pretty well in the preseason so far, so I feel like he's proved to for sure be a roster-level player at this point early. Noah Tagai is a tall, kind of physical tight end. I have them keeping him on the practice squad. They have him listed above some other guys on the depth chart. They have a few kind of veterans on the depth chart that I'm going to cut between Jordan Thomas and Andrew Vollert, and then Farad Green is also on the younger side. But I love this tight end room. It's just, you have kind of a baseline Jack Doyle and then a high upside Mo Alley Cox. So I like that. It's kind of like what Wentz had in Philadelphia with Ertz being closer to Doyle, and then Goddard kind of was that high ceiling developmental tight end. That's what they kind of have here. So I like that a lot. Let's move to the offensive line, where this is one of the best in the entire league. I think it is. There are no huge weaknesses on this line, and I feel absolutely great in like 4 of the 5 starters. So love to see that. And honestly, all changed when they signed Eric Fisher. Veterans that are getting signed. It all changed to me when they got him, because I was concerned before going into the draft that they were going to have to go with like Julian Davenport at left tackle, who has struggled, or Sam Tevy, who has played right tackle for the Chargers this whole career, that they were going to have to move him over to the left. And I did not feel good in either of those options. So I like them signing Eric Fisher. Now, he is still on the PUP list, so he might be out still from a bit. It's him, and then there's an edge rusher I'll talk about in a bit. Both are covering, I think, from the same injury, basically. And if he is back healthy, I think this offensive line is one of the best in the entire league. And overall, it is absolutely solid. And he is a huge difference maker for that. I was shocked that Kansas City already had a weak offensive line, and then they decided to cut. They're both their tackles that I thought at the time were their best linemen, but they ended up replacing them. But I think it was a solid idea for Indianapolis to get Eric Fisher. Now, once again, another reason with the injuries. Quentin Nelson is maybe the best lineman in the entire league, for sure the best guard in the entire league, but he's dealing with this injury. He's good at everything. He's an absolute stud, like best lineman in the league. But I will say, if they end up without Fisher and Nelson for a bit, that changes the whole season. And let alone if Wentz is hurt, that's why they're lower right now than where I think they possibly should be because of these injuries. And it's very unfortunate, because if they were to not be with those 3 players, that's not good at all. But even so, You need these guys healthy, for sure. Ryan Kelly has been an absolutely solid center. He's just a consistently really, really good center at this point in his career. Mark Glowinski is probably the biggest weakness on this line, but he's not even that bad. He's a startable player, for sure. And then they just gave Braden Smith a contract extension. He's performed really, really well since they picked him out of Auburn a few years ago. And I think he has really developed into a top right tackle in the league. So if you have Fisher, Nelson, Kelly, and Smith healthy, this is a top offensive line. But the injury's going to come back to bite them. As I mentioned earlier, some of the other tackle options were Santevi, who has just kind of been okay for the Chargers in his career. He's played mostly right tackle. There's also Julian Davenport, who's bounced around between the Texans and then was traded as part of the Laramie Tunsil trade, I believe. So he has kind of been disappointing as well. Will Holden, they have listed above both of those players at left tackle on the depth chart. That's why I'm keeping him. Otherwise, honestly, I'm not a huge Will Holden guy. Chris Reed, a veteran guard, I have them keeping. He's probably their best guard depth behind Nelson and Glowinski. And I have them keeping Danny Pinter, who they took out of Ball State last year. He could potentially play guard and center. So they have him listed as center at the depth chart, which is why I'm not keeping Joey Hunt. I have them keeping Jake Eldrenkamp and then Will Fries, who they took this year in late in the draft. So I have them keeping those guys as developmental players. As I mentioned, I have them cutting Joey Hunt, and I also have them cutting Carter O'Donnell. So this is an absolutely solid offensive line, and if it's healthy, it's one of the best in the league. If it's not, that's where you start to get some issues. I do not want to have to start Sam Tevy or Julian Davenport at left tackle, and that's once again not counting if Wentz is hurt. So if the injuries don't affect this team, I absolutely love their offense for sure. Now let's talk about Kwity Paye and this edge rush room. So they took Kwity Paye this year out of Michigan, and I liked his tape. I didn't think he was a high upside player. I had guys in the end. For sure, I know I had Jalen Phillips above him. I think I may have had Gregory Rousseau above him in this year's class. Otherwise, they were very, very close for different reasons. They're both good for different reasons. Kwity Paye was maybe the safest edge rusher, but he did not, to me, show that game-wrecking dominant, except the Minnesota game. If you go back and watch my film breakdown, he tore that game up. But otherwise, I didn't see the crazy explosiveness, but I definitely thought he was a first-round player, and if he fell into the 20s, it would be a value. And so my comp for him, I think, was Everson Griffin, as kind of not particularly a fast guy, very good, though, getting around the edge, a few good pass rush moves. That's where I see him. So I would rather had him start as a number 2, like Everson Griffin was when they had Danielle Hunter there in Minnesota. That's where I wanted him to end up, but some in a role like that. But that's not what happened. So they have him where he is for now, and so I think he's going to be fine. I think that it's good for him to just get reps right away. I liked him coming out of Michigan this year as a player overall. Tyquan Lewis and Kamoko Toure are both players that were just waiting to break out, basically. We are hoping that one of them can really step up. If not, they picked Dayo Odeyingbo, who is currently on the PUP list with Eric Fisher. They took him in like the 3rd round, maybe a little early, so I feel like though they believe in him, and that's kind of causing some pressure potentially in this edge room. So that could, I don't know what's going to happen there. They also have Al-Quadin Muhammad, who's kind of a good run stopper as well. So I like him as just kind of a veteran there, because the rest of this edge room is unproven and young. Ben Banogu is a high upside player, really quick. So I like him actually. It's just a developmental role here. So I like the rotation. I just barely have them cutting Isaac Rochelle. When you bring in guys like Odeyingbo and Paye, it starts to weed out other players. But I like Paye. Don't love him as a number 1 edge rusher personally. But can we get something out of Taekwon Lewis and Kamoko Toure? And maybe even Ben Banogu, or if Odeyingbo can come back from that injury, potentially. But we just need to see something from one of these other players for me to really, really feel confident. Their defensive tackle room is, for what they have, elite. The depth behind those three is not particularly great. DeForest Buckner, one of the best defensive linemen in the league. I think he's really performed well at a Pro Bowl level for this team too since that trade. That was a great trade in retrospect, I feel like, and it will end up being that way. And so he's so good at everything. He stopped the run, rushed the passer, fits really well in this scheme. I think he's proven his worth. They also have Grover Stewart, who kind of came out of nowhere last year. It's kind of an unknown player. He's a run stopper, though, for sure. That is definitely what he does, and he kind of fits that role of the we've seen it a few times before where teams will pick up guys basically off the street and then play them at, nose tackle. That's what Grover Stewart does. They also bring in Antoine Woods, who's bounced around a bit, but still can be a good veteran presence at this point in his career. So I have them keeping Andrew Brown on the practice squad. He's dealt with, I think he retired at some point and then came back. He potentially still could offer some veteranship here, but not particularly confident in him as a roster player. And then I have them cutting all these other D tackles. So what they have is great. They have, Buckner's absolutely elite, and then they have Grover Stewart just to be the run stopper. It's just, I don't think they have a lot behind Antoine Woods. So let's move to the linebackers. Where, okay, the top two I think are solid. Then it's a bunch of guys that are literally all in the same level after that. Like Darius Leonard, they just paid him a huge contract. I think he's absolutely dominant. He's a very, very dominant player who can run sideline to sideline, cover well, and make lots of great tackles. He's an absolute stud. I do believe that you needed to keep him around, and it's worth paying him as one of the top paid linebackers. Bobby Okereke is starting to develop, not quite there as a full-time stud, but I think that he is starting to develop into a really good starting player, and give him more opportunities here. I think that'll be good for him. Then you might have a competition for this other role. They're all basically the same. It's who can compete on special teams. I swear I've seen these same four guys on their depth chart for the last 5 years. And they all are just that barely making the team, competing for that third starting spot potentially, between the four. Zaire Franklin, EJ Speed, Sky Moore, Matthew Adams. They're just all there, honestly. You almost mix them up pretty consistently because they all have, it's just interesting. It's whoever can play good special teams for this other position, specifically for the depth spots. And that's why Jordan Glasgow is a pretty good option as well. He was listed all over when he came out of Michigan last year. He was listed at safety. I think they may have announced him as a safety. They're for sure playing him at linebacker here. Some places listed him as an edge. He was all over. Some even defensive tackle, I think. He played everything at Michigan, but he could potentially be a special teams guy. I've been cutting their other linebackers there, but love Darius Leonard. Bobby Okereke, solid, and then otherwise not much, to be honest. The corner room, I like what they have. For where they are. If we count Kenny Moore as a slot nickel corner, one of the best in the league. He's one of the most underrated players in the entire league, I feel like, right now. And he makes so many important plays that I think that he is such an important piece on this defense. Xavier Rhodes actually performed pretty well for this team last year. He, started to fall off with the Vikings. They let him go. He comes here. I don't love him as a number one corner, but he still is okay at this point in his career, I feel like. So that is fine, I guess, overall. TJ Carey, another guy who can kind of play inside and out. He, at this point in his career, is just kind of a veteran depth piece. There's a Rocky Sin who came out of, I think it was Temple a few years ago. He has not really developed into anything special, to be honest, at this point in his career. So I need to see something from him. Isaiah Rodgers starting to compete there, maybe get some special teams action. Same with Marvell Tell. And then they recently brought in Holton Hill. I have him barely making the roster. He might not make it, but I think that he potentially could at least compete for a spot. So this corner room is really, really good with what they have, specifically with Kenny Moore, and I think Xavier Rhodes is fine at where he is. I'd rather have him be a number 2, though. But overall, I think it's pretty solid. The safety room as well, pretty good. I like Julian Blackmon a lot. Hard hitter, good coverage ability. I think he really was a huge underrated player for them last season as a rookie. Very underappreciated. But he has developed into something. And then I feel like you'll have a competition for this other starting spot between Kari Willis, Sean Davis, and the other Sean Davis. I think you'll compete with that. Otherwise, they do have George Odom and Ibrahim Campbell could both compete for spots as well. I think they'll keep one of them on the practice squad potentially. But I think Kari Willis has shown the most hard hitter, decent coverage as well. I like Sean Davis though potentially. I was shocked how low they have the SEAN Davis. I was shocked how low they have him on the depth chart right now. I would personally almost have him starting opposite Julian Blackmon, because Blackman's going to be a hard hitter. Sean Davis can be more of your coverage player. So I was shocked that they don't have him higher, and they have him below guys like George Odom. And then the other Sean Davis, they spent like a 5th-round pick on this year out of Florida, so I'm keeping him around because they spent some pretty high capital. Then their special teams, one of the best in the league, specifically Rodrigo Blankenship with the specs is absolutely a stud. Not even joking around, he's a great kicker. I was honestly surprised like he didn't get drafted last year. And then Rigoberto Sanchez, also a very solid punter. Luke Rhodes, a pretty good long snapper. Then they also now have Eddie Pinheiro, still trying to make a team of some type, but I don't think it's going to be here when you have the GOAT, Rodrigo Blankenship. So let's jump into talking about their schedule now. So let's start talking about the Colts. As last episode, we started putting in the green W's. This episode, we have a lot. And it feels weird. I feel like this team is a borderline playoff team, which I guess where I have them at now, since you can't really go 500. They're the lowest you can be. I mean, the highest you can be without being above 500 now. That's just weird to me, not seeing 8 and seeing 8 and 9. But if this team can also bounce back from injuries, like if they don't have any injuries, this is a great, great team. They start with the Seahawks, who are pretty good. Haven't revealed them yet. Rams, I think, are going to be solid this year. Titans, still up there in their own division. Dolphins, I have revealed, so a few tough games there. The Ravens also tough, but then they get a nice stretch here where they have the Texans, who I have as the worst team in the league, and the Jets, actually, within 4 weeks. They have my bottom 2 teams. So that's good for them schedule-wise. The Niners, I feel like, are potentially in a bounce-back year. As I already said, the Titans are pretty good. If you are new to the series, I always kind of forget to say this right away. The 50s basically mean I think they'll win 50% of those games. One of the 2 that are the same color. So, for example, the 2 Titans games go together. It could be 2 games against the same team, 2 away games, 2 home games, 2 teams with similar ranks, that type of thing. And I also give automatic L's and automatic W's. We're just kind of starting to get into the automatic W's now. So that's kind of that first half of the schedule. Then we got the Jaguars. Winnable game for sure. I have them winning that. I've already revealed them. I swear I've seen this like at least 5 times this series, where the Bills and the Bucks are either back-to-back or within like 4 weeks of each other on team schedules. And I don't like that because that is tough for pretty much every team. I mean, you'll see those are 2 of my top teams. And that's rough because if they're trying to make a playoff push with a late bye too, honestly, for the Colts, I'd almost want them to get an early bye because of the injuries they're dealing with right now. But then they have the Texans, maybe bounce back there. But then that's a tough stretch. Like at least they have the bye week. But for those 6 weeks, including the bye week, tough games. I think the Patriots bounce back this year. I think the Cardinals also maybe outperform. I think those 2 are really good teams. I've already revealed the Raiders a while ago. Jaguars I've also already revealed. So they come out 8 and 9, which is the highest I've revealed so far for any team. It honestly hurts a little. I thought they were going to be closer to 9, but I guess this is about where I would say they are. Because I will say this. I think within a year or two, I think this team will be a playoff level team, and I think Wentz will start taking them into a top level. But otherwise, I think that these injuries could really, really cost them. So I have them going 8-9, which is not bad. My offensive player of the year is going to be Jonathan Taylor. As I mentioned, for fantasy purposes, I'm not super confident in drafting him, but as an all-around player and getting opportunities, I'm going with Jonathan Taylor here. I feel like, especially if Wentz is hurt, I think he's going to be getting a whole lot of potential opportunities, and even if he does get some taken away by Marlon Mack and Nyheim Hines, he's going to make the most of when he does have an opportunity on the field. Defensive player of the year, to me, you have two options. You could go Darius Leonard or DeForest Buckner. I'm going Darius Leonard, but both are solid options there overall. And then breakout player of the year, I went with Darius Leonard. Breakout player of the year, I also have two options that are both second-year guys. I'm going with either Michael Pittman, who I have going with, or Julian Blackmon. I think that Michael Pittman will really step up in this role, especially with T.Y. regressing. They're going to need somebody to go out and take that number 2 and potentially number 1 receiving role. So I think Pittman will break out this year. I also have Kwity Paye being the rookie of the year, one of their only rookies to really start. So I think it's unfortunate he has to step into a number 1 pass rushing role. I would rather have him start as a 2, but he'll make the most of it, and I'm pretty confident in him. I liked him coming out of Michigan this year. So thank you so much for watching this far into the video. We're going to keep going through these teams. We're getting close. I did the math. I've been trying to grind at these so I can potentially finish before the season. It's going to be close, so we'll see what happens. But it is possible. I have a few days to spare, basically. I mean, I normally don't upload every day, but I have been trying to recently so I can try to get through the series. So thank you so much for watching this video, and I will see you in the next one.